All right, welcome in. Welcome in. It's a Monday Night Football, not one, two games to look at. And yes, often imitated, never duplicated, 5 bets in 5 minutes on the fastest growing sports betting community across YouTube, the Odd Shopper channel. You've made it. You found us. Thank you. Appreciate it. The one thing we want from you, subscribe. You can also hit the thumbs up button and notification bell so you don't miss any of these videos when they drop. But we want you to be part of this ever-growing, non-stop building community here on OddShop, because a lot of you are smart, a lot of you are sharp, so we'll always take your comments, anything and everything you have. You're probably looking at the time of this video thinking, it says 5 bets in 5 minutes, but that guy over there, he did longer than 5 minutes. The betting segment will be 5 bets in 5 minutes. I promise you that. And what we always do is I explain what's going on. I wet your beak a little bit, all right? Here's a little bit of beak wetting for you and giving you the first play that we're about to hit. I'm also going to tell you before we get out of here 2 things. One, how to turn $10 into $200 free. That's it. Like, you don't have to do anything. I'm going to turn 10 into 200 free at BetMGM, where you can see in the background. And also, I'm going to tell you and show you another example of how the premium insider access can benefit you outside of just the free Odd Shopper site and outside of just the free Odd Shopper YouTube channel. There are things happening on the premium insider access that cannot, simply due to the law of physics, cannot happen on one of these pre-recorded videos. So without further ado, you know the drill here, right? Sit back, relax. I got you. 5 bets in 5 minutes. Let's start the clock. All right, we begin. Buffalo, as you can see, -3 first quarter. A lot of first quarters end with a margin of victory greater than 3. You do have 3-0. You do have 3-3 to worry about. 10-7, I'm not worried about that by any means. I like a 7-3. I like a 10-3 lead for Buffalo. Every single trend backs Buffalo in this game. Every single one of them, all right? And when you look at what matters most with the trends, it's Ryan Tannehill, 0-5 straight up against the spread last 5 versus Buffalo. A TD interception ratio of 2-5 in those games. We'll come back to that. 4-16 straight up. 3-17 against the spread on the road between home games. Love the Bills just to get out in an early lead here, more so than anything else, establish that lead and then force Tannehill into some throwing situations. And as I just mentioned, where we begin on the next one here is interceptions. Now, this is an easy one, right? Just told you that Ryan Tannehill's TD and interception ratio in the last 5, where he's 0-5 straight up against the spread, is 2-5. And that is atrocious. He's also down A.J. Brown, and I'm not so sure that the Tennessee Titans have replaced A.J. Brown by any means. So you look at the lack of a major.
Look at us. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first lineup review show that we have, the strategy show here, talking through everything that happened, the carnage that was Sunday, week 2 in the NFL. I'm Eric Lindquist, excited to be talking alongside my buddy Shit My Money DFS over on Twitter. That is Adam Scherer over there. Sounds like you had a Sunday that was akin to mine.
Yeah, it was absolutely awful.
That's it.
I mean, I don't want to talk about it anymore, so I'm happy to sit here for the next hour while you don't say anything.
Okay, well, the bit always works, so it's fun. Mike Lawrence behind the virtual glass there, doing a great job. He's going to be talking through, well, actually not talking through. He's going to be working through the entire slate. Fantastic. Give him some of your guys' claps, love, because again, sometimes you get in Fantasy Cruncher, there's a lot of things, nuances to figure out. He figured it out pretty darn quickly throughout this morning. So shout out to him doing a great job here today. And so we're pulling stuff up here. We're going to go through the slant like we always do. We tried to pull up the Millie, but for some reason, it's just not pulling up over on Fantasy Cruncher. But last week, we had a couple of things where we weren't able to make this show happen. Happy to be back for the first time this season. So hit that like button, subscribe button, and notification bell as we get going. Goes a long way for us. We're sponsored by Prize Picks. Excited to also talk about their product because I really enjoy playing over there. I wish they would add total home runs back to the package, but such is life. Let's dig in. And yeah, yesterday, it was just a weird day for me. I don't even know what happened because I normally game stack like crazy. I had all the Lamar Jackson, I had all the Jalen Waddle, and I got crushed. So good times.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I kind of did the same thing on FanDuel. I don't think I was that heavy on the Miami side, but I had a lot of the Baltimore side and just didn't put anything together, which is one of those, it always makes me laugh because like you get people in the industry that don't really play a lot of DFS. And then after the slates, they tweet about how close they were right about XYZ. And it's like, they're just assuming that because they liked Miami or Baltimore, they were going to have this like nut lineup when realistically you could still build very bad Baltimore or Miami lineups.
I kind of wanted to start with this because I thought that this was a very fascinating thing. Neil Orfield, who, if you guys don't know, he's a brand new, awesome, Stokastic employee. Look at me. First time. Maybe it's just that I'm going back to last year, and so I'm reverting to certain tendencies. But we love having Neil. Player Q DFS on Twitter. Go follow him over there. And you can see that he won almost 200K in Showdown last Thursday. It was beautiful stuff. The guy's just an absolute monster there. But he tweeted out his deal that he kind of has been doing like this for a little while for must-haves, great to have, nice to have. And at halftime of the early afternoon games, he tweeted out, must-haves, 90% likely to be in the winning lineup, Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman. That's how nuclear that game went, that Rashad Bateman wasn't even on the stratosphere of a dude that you actually needed at the end of that game.
Yeah, that slate was wild. Like at halftime, it was just like there is no scoring on this slate outside of like kind of the Lions. And even there, It was like the whole team was busting except for St. Brown and to some extent Goff. And then just the whole slate went nuts. Like you had the Washington side that was popular, score a bunch of points in the second half. You had the entire Miami-Baltimore game going nuts. It was just a really wild slate. Like at halftime, it just looked like I knew I was dead anyway because I had a lot of, McCaffrey and Barkley and guys that just weren't going to get there. But it really looked like it was going to be a really low scoring slate. And then the second half happened.
Well, let's pull up the slant here in the old Fantasy Cruncher. Once again, shout out Mike Lawrence for doing an awesome job behind the glass, helping us out, pulling up everything here. And I just want to group it by fantasy points because we're really going to see what encapsulates a game stack right from the get-go. And there were some points scored in that Baltimore-Miami game, and that was just the requirement of doing anything that you wanted to do in tournaments. And you can see we have Awesemo, we have DeColts, Steve Buzzard. You guys all know Steve Buzzard. Ship My Money, that would be the guy opposite of me on the screen here, the less attractive version of myself, and then Rinpack. So those four beautiful human beings. And then we have Omnicron, the guy, we'll add him, or Omniseon. Congratulations. 3 lineups, 1 cashed. Oh, he just won the slant, though, 20K. Must be nice. But
you say like you didn't do that in baseball like a month ago.
Yeah, but I was traveling. I literally hand-built lineups on a phone. What? I didn't have a choice.
Okay.
You're mean. You're not a nice person. You know what the best part is? That I put the right lineup in the $4 and the $15 at the same time.
Yeah.
So you could just win both.
Yeah, no, I lost like 20K yesterday and haven't had coffee this morning. It's not going to be a fun show for you.
Let's go. I got coffee. It's also my birthday. So if you guys want to hit the like button for that, I might as well just coax you guys into hitting the like button. But Lamar Jackson, Tyreek Hill, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Waddle, holy mother of God, have a game stack.
Yeah, that was good.
Then you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, who it's weird to think there weren't enough wide receiver spots to really, you couldn't really afford Hill, Waddle, Brown, Kupp, but if you played a lot of Cooper Kupp, you're not upset with the result of that. 14.3% ownership. I would say for me, if there was one thing that I would just redo on the slate yesterday, as much as I'd love to go to the Baltimore-Miami game stack more than I already did, I played a lot of Lamar Jackson. I played a lot of Rashad Bateman. I played a little bit of Mark Andrews, not nearly enough. And then I played Jalen Waddle as the comeback on pretty much all of those. But I would have just played a lot more Cooper Kupp. I feel like that's something going forward where on these slates where he's going to be under 15%, we should just play a lot more of him than the field.
I kind of disagree. I think that's sort of...
Really?
Yeah, I mean, not to say that you shouldn't play Cooper Kupp, obviously, but I think it's kind of just revisionist history because he had a massive game. Like, he was $1,300 or so more than Devontae Adams. And Devontae Adams obviously sucked and was more popular, but like, I don't even think it would be one thing if they were the same price range and Adams was getting way more ownership. But I mean, I think if you play that slate out like 1,000 times, there's a lot of times where him and Adams just kind of do the same thing. And, so like, obviously he was getting less ownership, but it's not like there wasn't a reason. They projected about the same, and one of them was a lot more expensive. So I don't know. I think it kind of just, it's always good to play Cooper Kupp. That goes without saying. And I think it was kind of just amplified by how yesterday's slate played out.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I think amplified is the right word. I thought Devontae Adams, after he caught that 1-yard touchdown, little gimme, whatever at the goal line.
Here's a perfect example of what I'm saying. We had the same situation basically yesterday with Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. Nobody's talking about how you should play Jonathan Taylor every week because he didn't do shit. But it was the same exact spot as we're talking about with Kupp.
It's true. And I mean, price-wise, identical. It was just crazy. It was really, really crazy. And then you have your pivot. The first running back who pops up on the board, period, is one Nick Chubb, who I don't know, just waltzed in for 3 touchdowns at 6.4% ownership. He was the second most likely player in DK odds to score a touchdown yesterday. I think it was like -150 anytime touchdown scorer. Ridiculous kind of number that we were looking at for Chubb. We saw 2 touchdowns for Kareem Hunt, 1 passing, 1 catching in week 1. Revisionist history. There you go. Nick Chubb this time around was dynamic against the Jets, and kind of strange that he brought a pass catcher in Garrett Wilson and come from behind mode along for the ride. I don't know how you would ever land on that duo together in the same game, but yet another kind of correlation that exists on this slate. Anything kind of note for Nick Chubb's performance?
I think it was kind of just like a classic Nick Chubb game. Somebody asked on the morning show yesterday with me and Josh, like, for our thoughts on Nick Chubb. And before I could even answer, somebody else in chat was like, why do you need thoughts on Nick Chubb? It's Nick Chubb. And like, that's the way I view him too. Like, it's somebody who's splitting carries with a good running back. He's not heavily involved in the pass game, but he's going to get a lot of goal line work, and he's an incredibly explosive player that can just house it anytime he touches it. So he's kind of, as long as he's not popular, he's like always going to be a good tournament play because he's always a little bit overpriced for his median outcome because he does have to deal with Kareem Hunt and because he's going to be relatively expensive. But for his ceiling, he's like always a little bit underpriced. So it always makes him a good tournament play. But like, you look back at his line, and I kind of hadn't paid a lot of attention to it until somebody I follow on Twitter was touting how he had said to pivot to Chubb off of Fournette.
Oh, you don't want to say a name? Say a name. Call them out.
Yeah.
Call them out.
And they ended up being basically the same ownership. But I went back and looked, and it kind of just like, it was exactly what Nick Chubb is. Fournette had like 24 carries and 4 targets and just did nothing. And then Chubb has like 78 rushing yards and falls into the end zone 3 times. But it's like, it's not like that's surprising. Like, that that's in his range of outcomes. You know that he's going to get those opportunities. But it was just interesting to me because from like a utilization standpoint, you're going to view Nick Chubb exactly the same way next week that you did this week, where he's a relatively expensive guy that's not guaranteed all of the work, but that is likely to really take advantage of the opportunities that he gets.
This is probably the portion of the show that I'm the most uncomfortable about because I do want to get your opinion. It's something to be paying attention to going forward. And it's, if you took Baltimore and Miami off of yesterday's slate, we would be talking nonstop about Carson Wentz and Joe Flacco. We're looking at 2 guys on the cheap end, and this used to be kind of the quote-unquote cash way of playing DFS, where you pay down at quarterback and then you get all the pass catchers that you want, and you can pay up at running back. You can have a stacked lineup, but your quarterback sucks. Now with some of the ceilings that exist with like a Lamar Jackson, with some of these other quarterbacks, you can play, you're more inclined to be paying up in cash more than you did in previous years. Obviously, Derek Carr was down there as well, and he didn't have like a terrible game by any means, but Carson Wentz and Joe Flacco, I mean, this is just wild what we saw out of both of them yesterday. Joe Flacco in come from behind mode, Carson Wentz in come from behind mode. We've now had 30 plus fantasy points from Carson Wentz in back-to-back games. Dotson looks like he's going to be a serious factor for them. Curtis Samuel looking like he can be a go-to wide receiver a la Hunter Renfrow to a certain extent. How do you feel about your Washington, what is their name, Commanders going forward?
I'm still kind of torn. their offensive line in the first half yesterday looked so bad. And it was kind of, Twitter was pissing me off because like everybody has their perception of Carson Wentz. And so when you see Washington get like 25 yards or whatever they did in the first half, the whole timeline is just like talking about how bad Carson Wentz is. And I'm sitting there watching the game and it's like he takes the snap and he gets hit in the face like repeatedly. Like even Warren Sharp puts out a tweet at like halftime. I obviously consider him someone that knows what he's talking about. But he like puts out a tweet at halftime basically just saying how embarrassing Washington's first half performance was. And I don't know if he intended it to come off as just putting it on Wentz's shoulders, but basically he just put out like Wentz's yards per attempts and how like infrequently Wentz was even trying to throw the ball down the field. And I'm like, he doesn't have time. Like there's nothing he can do. But in the second half, I'm assuming Detroit was just playing different defensively, although I don't think they were blitzing a lot in the first half either. Washington was just incapable of blocking a 4-man rush, and it was allowing them to drop into coverage as well. But so that's obviously a big concern. I mean, if they frequently block like they did in the first half of that game, there's nothing that you can do. But at the same time, coming into the season, I was optimistic about their offense because I don't think Wentz is very good, but I think he's better than anything they've had since Cousins. And I think there's a lot of talent around him. I mean, McLaurin, we know, is extremely good. Dotson is talented. Curtis Samuel is extremely athletic. And if he can stay healthy, he's a big part of this offense. You have Logan Thomas, you have Antonio Gibson. So it's an offense that I think has a lot of upside. It's just a matter of they also have their flaws. So you're probably going to get some really ugly weeks mixed in, like it looked like yesterday was going to be. But there's also going to be a lot of upside to be had when you have a cheap Carson Wentz playing on a team that is probably going to be in a lot of competitive games and or playing from behind and throwing to good receivers.
Love it. Amari Cooper. This is the last guy I really want to talk about here on the top end. If there's anything else that pops up, I think we'll talk some DST when we go through some of the value columns because, they generally have some of the higher value scores just because of low salaries. And then they do stuff like the Jaguars did yesterday. But Amari Cooper, week 1, completely blinked. 3 catches, 17 yards. Everybody's talking about how he's lost a step. This is that internal bias where we've seen Amari Cooper so many times, whether it was Dallas, whether it was with the Raiders, no matter where he could just spike upside. I don't think anything changed other than maybe a little extra opportunity. Well, 10 targets is extra opportunity, 101 yards, touchdown. Another wide receiver that's going to fly a little bit under the radar compared to everything that happened in Baltimore, Miami, compared to what happened in Washington, Detroit. What did you kind of notice from Amari Cooper? And can you just talk about some of like the biases that we have after a week 1 dud for a talented guy like him?
Yeah, I think especially at receiver, talent is important to keep in mind. Like running back, obviously talent changes things too. Like we were just talking about with Nick Chubb, but there's only so much you can do. Receiving, I think talent can lead you to bigger, better results. And it was actually funny that Cooper ended up having that game because I had a ticket in the $3,000 Millie yesterday. And so I put in I did awful. I put in my, top tournament lineup and I really liked it, except I had Amari Cooper and I was just like, I didn't dislike Cooper, but whatever. And so I switched him to Christian Kirk, which worked out fine as well. He was still my highest scoring player on the team, but it was just, I told Josh, I was like, man, like I like Cooper, but it's kind of scary to play him. And it doesn't really have to do with him as much as it does with Brissett as well. It's just a spot where I don't really trust the passing game there. But from like a broader standpoint, when you're talking about mid-range receivers, a lot of times you really can get a lot of upside. Allen Robinson was an example I used on the show yesterday where, especially early in the season, people are just going to react so heavily to what they've seen. Week 1 with Cooper, obviously he was non-existent. Allen Robinson was non-existent. And it's just like I think the best way to approach it is to try and like ask yourself like when week 17, week 18 comes around, is it more likely that you look back and say, Amari Cooper or Allen Robinson were just completely non-existent all season long? Or is it more likely that you look back and just say like, yeah, they had some good games and they had some bad games?
I love that. That's what you guys are here listening to, because that's the kind of stuff where, especially in a sport like NFL, like if this were NBA and somebody had, a really wide distribution and you had a bell curve that was out of control and the standard deviations are nuts. I mean, you're talking about like trying to think of like who that player, like a Damian Jones type, somebody who, could play 20 minutes and put up 45, or somebody who could play 18 minutes and put up 5. Like there's guys like that in the NBA, but like That's everybody in the NFL except for the guys who are just like volume hogs. Like there's going to be times where Donovan Peoples-Jones, who I think is a talented wide receiver, has more opportunity. And then there's going to be times where Amari Cooper ends up being the guy. And, it's almost like that's going to be what you're going to look at going forward, I think, with Dotson, Samuel, and McLaurin as well. Do you expect Terry McLaurin to be this bad in week 3, week 4, week 5 going forward? I sure don't. So I love everything you said. This entire range of wide receiver. I mean, I'm in love with Drake London. I always have been. He made Slovis look good at USC. That's the biggest compliment I can give a wide receiver. What?
I laughed.
Thank
you.
I
actually know who that is from playing college football last year and getting burned by him.
He's the worst. He's so bad. USC. They're really good this year, though. Caleb, I just can't even. At least we have actual NFL teams out here. If this was 10 years ago, before there were NFL teams back in LA, like USC fans would be they would be so overwhelming. I couldn't walk through the streets and deal with them. But anything else you want to talk about with some of the highest scores on yesterday's slate?
So St. Brown, I think, is a really interesting talking point because it goes back to how everything's like intertwined. And I was DMing with somebody yesterday because we were just,
of course you were,
again, talking about how like the people that don't really play a lot of DFS always think that they like would have had the nut lineups because like, oh, I was on St. Brown, but like everything correlates. Like looking at my exposures to St. Brown, he's somebody that I really like. I play a lot of him. He won me a bunch of money last year when he was always low owned. But the reason, or a big reason, one of the reasons that I didn't get a lot of St. Brown on this slate is the ownership that was coming to Washington also. Like I wasn't getting a lot of Carson Wentz because he was popular. I wasn't getting a lot of the Washington side of that game. So as a result, I just like don't have as much St. Brown because you have a lot of people running back their Washington stacks with St. Brown, and it's going to bump his ownership up. And since I wasn't making those stacks, I didn't get there. So it's one thing too, I think, to keep in mind if you are someone that, on Monday, whether it's watching a show like this or going into lineup study on your own and looking back at what players did, keep in mind that a lot of stuff is sort of like intertwined. Like you shouldn't look at, using St. Brown for an example. I wouldn't look at like looking at me, Rinpack, Greg, Alex, and Steve. I'd be careful coming to the conclusion that like we all thought he was a bad play or we all, for lack of a better word, wanted to be underweight on him. There's a good chance, and you can see it, we were all just not getting to the Washington side of that game. The only person that we have on the screen that did get to St. Brown is Rinpack at 23%. He also is the only one that was playing Carson Wentz. So it really, you want to just keep in mind if you're trying to like go back and look at stuff and learn, you want to keep in mind like there's a lot of times there's going to be reasons that players were higher or lower on somebody other than like, oh, they thought this was a great spot or they thought this was a bad spot type stuff.
Man, you're on fire today. This is great stuff. Just like this is also great stuff. Free 3 days, 100% free for 3 days. NFL tools and content here at Stokastic. Simply go to the page. Check it out. I'm telling you, it's the best tools and content out of any other site in the industry. And I don't just say that because I work here. I say this because I was a sub here once upon a time. And that's what drew me to wanting to work here eventually. And I'm just telling you, lineup generator, the boom bust tool. We have so many other great things that are being added to the fray constantly. Guys like Sky behind the scenes. We've got Alex Baker still working hard for us, getting everything done on the data side. DeColtz and Eddie Lai, all of these guys just working overtime to give you the best opportunity to succeed at DFS. And right now it's 3 free days of all of our NFL DFS tools. So check that out. Fantasy Cruncher, not a part of that. Let that be known. I always want to say that really, really fast as if I'm at the end of an ad, but there's really no read for, like, I don't need to do that because there's really no ad. It's just 3 free days of content. Check it out. 100%. Cool. That's all. All right. To the ownership side. And I'm looking forward to this because there was some failed chalk, and I love when there's failed chalk generally on certain slates. Not always because you can avoid it. Because
I prefer when it's not the ones that I play.
It's true. It's preferably not them, but I will say props to you because the Bengals had to be the worst tournament play almost ever. Like
I'm absolutely shocked by the ownership that everybody except for me on the screen gave to the Bengals.
Unbelievable. And I
say that as a compliment because I respect them, but
they're the best players, and you guys are all the best players. Rinpack, Ship My Money, Awesemo DeColtz. Those are 4 of the top 20 players on planet Earth at DFS. and you were the only one who shorted the Bengals defense. I'll let you do the talking about that because that's where I wanted to start.
So the 2% part, certainly aggressive, like could have obviously played more. But obviously this has been like the huge talking point because there's just been so many people with giving their opinions on it. I talked about it for a while on the show with Josh yesterday, and it kind of made me laugh because I went on this like 3-minute tangent explaining like exactly why popular defenses in general are like the easiest things to get away from. And then I finish and Josh Gillum in chat is like, yeah, but Cooper Rush is bad. It's like, yep, he is. Cool. But the thing with defenses is the scoring for DFS doesn't really line up with being a good real life defense or being in a good spot to prevent points, particularly from an upside standpoint. If you have, let's just say like a more extreme example, like Cooper Rush really was like the worst quarterback of all time. Like I'm not going to say Nathan Peterman because he threw 6 interceptions. But like, let's say Cooper Rush was somebody that like the Cowboys aren't even going to let run the offense, and he's just going to hand off every play.
Like Justin Fields.
Yeah, your defense basically has no upside in that case. Like you're not going to give up points and you're going to get like a solid score, but you're losing out on a position where you can win a tournament by just going to a low-owned defense that happens to get a pick six or a kick return for a touchdown. But from an upside standpoint, the scoring is just incredibly unpredictable because it's so reliant on pick sixes, fumble returns for touchdowns, kickoff returns for touchdowns, and you just can't predict those. So typically, you're just going to be better off in tournaments using that as a spot to play a low-owned team and be contrarian, just because it's like the only spot where every player basically has the same range of outcomes regardless of ownership. When you talk about chalk at other positions, you talk about Devontae Adams, you talk about Christian McCaffrey, the reason they're getting so much ownership and that it's typically deserved is that you can't find that many other players that give you the same combination of floor and ceiling. At defense, it's pretty much all the same. Like, sure, the Bengals are slightly more likely to have success than another team, but it's pretty much all the same. And so with the Bengals yesterday, the one point where it still worked in their favor and still made sense was how cheap they were. Yep. Obviously you like paying down a defense and it opens up a lot for you. There are times where they're not going to get the 40%, but there will be times where you get like a $3K or $3,100 defense that's like 25% owned. I think that's even worse than the Bengals thing yesterday, just because you're actually paying up at the position. But still, you look at teams. I know you had the Falcons at 2,100. You had the Jags at I think 2,300. And I'm not just mentioning them because they actually had good games, but they still have the same range of outcomes as the Bengals, even though they're in worse matchups. And even if you lose, the other thing too is, let's say the most likely outcome is none of those teams do very well. You're probably giving up like, 2-3 points to the Bengals. Like the Falcons score 4, the Bengals score 7, the Jags score 6. That's probably not going to cost you a tournament anyway. Yeah, I think it's just a wasted opportunity to get upside at a position at low ownership if you're playing the Bengals there, because you could just you could get basically the same lineups without the Bengals, or you could go to a more expensive team and just get a completely different roster build. But it's just there's so much volatility at the position and they all have basically the same range of outcomes. So you're basically just playing a 40% on defense because their median projection is slightly higher, but there's so much variance around the median projection that they're all the same.
Yeah, almost 37% of a defense. I would find it hard to believe that if we got to lock with a 15.4% ownership projection on them going into it, and everybody on the screen were able to see that they were going to be 37%, that they wouldn't find ways to pivot more than likely at a position that, as you said, can be as volatile, where fluky things happen to create a defense. And that's what you saw if you click on the value column there, Mike Lawrence. If you click on the value column, Jaguars and Bucks, those two defenses smashed. And look at Rinpack again, 10% of the Bucks defense. I thought that was a really sharp call. It's still Jameis Winston. I played a lot of him in prize picks for interceptions. I mean, you could still get over a 0.5 interception mark on him. That seemed a little asinine to me with his track record. If you have a negative game script, because the Bucs are a good football team, that made a lot of sense to get there. I wish I got to even more, but 10% is a pretty good allocation. You got to right around the field or just over the field on that. That's beautiful as well. But Jaguars, Bucks, Falcons, 3 of the top 4 players in terms of value point per dollar all came out of the defense position. So anything about that to finish it out?
I don't know. I was trying to get some head-to-head action in chat.
Bruh. That's okay. Yeah, it's all right. Bobby Brownie, it'll be okay, buddy. It'll be okay. There's single entry tournaments. He knows that, right? Like,
yeah, well, he was mad that I've never won those, even though I did like 48 hours ago. And then he's mad that I haven't won the Millie, which is certainly not a single entry tournament.
It's definitely not. Also, you don't play the Millie very often.
I play it every week ever since.
Oh, you do.
I wasn't playing it, even though Alex insisted I should be. And then last year I got second in the slant with a lineup that would have won the Millie. And so ever since then, I've played it every week.
Yeah, we're probably going to do that from now on then.
Yeah.
You were almost on a boat in Tahiti, and instead you're in a loft in Baltimore.
Yeah. But what was your question?
It's lovely, though. I was just talking about point per dollar, like not something that I think about a whole lot. But Jaguars, Buccaneers, Falcons, 3 of the top 4 top values all came out of the defense position.
Yeah, which, I mean, makes sense just because they were so cheap. And then obviously they all had good games as well. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. The Bengals, like I said, my 2% was an aggressive stand. You certainly didn't need to be that low. But playing a defense that is that popular is just, to me, absolutely horrible.
Saquon Barkley, he was very popular. Saquon Barkley did not do what you wanted him to do in tournaments. It was pretty brutal. I didn't know what to do. We had him projected right around 20%. I had 23% yesterday in my 150, smaller tournament than this, obviously, but 39.5% ownership is a hefty number. He was over 40% in the Millie. Pretty insane type numbers. Him and Davante Adams, I mean, you could make a case. Obviously, they were too cheap, I think, for their respective roles. Based off of what we saw week 1, this is where we have to have that age-old conversation between quote-unquote point chasing and then what the best plays on the slate are. How did you feel about Saquon and Davante, considering you were at 40% on Saquon, 52% on Davante Adams? How do you look at chalky plays like that I think it's just unquestionably they were good plays? How do you kind of figure out how to put them into lineups knowing they were going to be as popular as they were?
Yeah, so that's where like you said, it's not so much looking at what they produced the week before, but what their role was, what you expect their role to be going forward, and also what the price was. Like, if one of two things happens, if like Davante Adams had been the same price as Cooper Kupp, whether that's Davante Adams going up to 9,900 or Cooper Kupp coming down, Davante Adams at 40% ownership, 1, wouldn't have happened, and 2, would have been bad. But when you're getting that discount and you're just talking about somebody that is likely to have very similar opportunities, there's no real reason, unless it's within like a specific lineup and you have the salary and you're looking to save ownership, there's no reason that you prefer the more expensive guy when you're just talking about, basically the same play. I think Adams and Kupp projected within like a half point of each other yesterday, and Adams was a lot less expensive. And with Barkley, it was kind of a similar thing. Like, his salary rose from week 1 when I think he was like 6,200 or something. But that was such a ridiculous mispricing that, based on the workload we saw week 1 and also yesterday, it's still too cheap. So you're getting somebody that not only is really talented, but that also is just underpriced based on their workload. Like, we saw Saquon Barkley was just going to be the clear number 1. We expected that going in. We saw it week 1. We saw it last week. I think yesterday. I think he had still like 21 carries and 4 or 5 targets. He just didn't come through. So that was a spot where I'm a lot happier just playing that chalk than, for example, defense, because you just don't have that many. You don't have that many options around $7,300 at running back that A, give you anywhere close to the same workload as Barkley, and then B, aren't also getting ownership. Obviously guys like Joe Mixon were getting less ownership, but Mixon was still popular. He got 20%. So it's not like defense where you can just get a 1% owned guy that gives you the same range of outcomes. So the other thing with Barkley and also with Adams for me was I was also pretty heavy on those games. Like, if you look at my total exposures, I had a lot of DJ Moore, I had a lot of Daniel Jones, I had a lot of Richie James, I had a lot of Derek Carr. I don't think I had a lot of much from the Arizona side, but a lot of Josh Jacobs. So not only did I think those were 2 of the best plays on the slate individually, and so I was willing to play them at that ownership, but also they just worked into the stacks that I was playing.
Yeah, I thought that they made a lot of sense on yesterday's slate. I kind of did the holding hands approach. I played a lot of Davante Adams that turned into Cooper Kupp. I had to do some late swap stuff because obviously if you didn't have Miami Baltimore, you were kind of in trouble. That doesn't mean that Davante Adams wasn't still a good play, there were just a lot of dead lineups that I had where I figured I had to do something, and
Yeah, I
Cooper
just
Kupp
gave up.
felt. Oh, that was nice of you.
Except for my 3K lineup, I did swap from the Raiders to Russell Wilson.
Have you ever seen Galaxy Quest?
No.
Never give up, never surrender.
Nope.
Okay, you have no context for it, so I sound like a lunatic. Cool. Christian McCaffrey, I thought was one of the best tournament plays on the entire slate. I love seeing that you had Ship, you had DeColts, you had Osimo, you had pretty much everybody there. You had Rinpack at the field. Shame on you, Rinpack, even though it didn't obviously work out. You wanted more than 20 out of Christian McCaffrey, but such is life. Let's talk Tampa Bay, because I think this is something that you and I were talking about a little bit before the show, and I thought it was interesting. Leonard Fournette, I don't think that he was like the worst play on planet Earth, but I definitely wanted to get over the field on everybody that was wearing a Tampa Bay uniform yesterday. You ended up getting news. Julio Jones, who looked like a pretty prominent part of the offense in week one. They were running jet sweeps with the man, for God's sake. Like, Leonard Fournette had a massive amount of usage there. 24 carries, 4 targets, had nothing to show for it against New Orleans. That'll happen from time to time. But if there's one thing that I mined out of yesterday, it's that I'm going to play a lot of Leonard Fournette going forward. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. So one thing that I just noticed, did you realize that Fournette was 8.5% owned in the Millie and 17% in the slant?
I did.
Yeah, this goes back to why Alex used to tell me I should be playing the Millie over the slant if I was
so the Millie's not populating, and that's why, again, I know that it says on the front how I won $1 million or how somebody won $1 million. We're just doing the slant today. It's a sharper field. The best plays are going to get exponentially more ownership, but 7% in the Millie.
Yeah, that when I saw, because I had a lot of Tampa across the board, when I saw their ownership in the Millie, I was just like, wow, this is amazing, and that included Fournette. One other before I get to that, Marcus Empara said, would you have played Barkley at 45% owned if you knew that was his ownership to begin with, because he was projected closer to 30? I would have played him, not as much as I did. And it kind of goes back to, I wanted to say, like, to quantify all of this, like the boom bust tool we have on the site is really useful. But it's basically like I compare how often I think a player is going to be optimal to their ownership. And so it's not like I'm just like picking, oh, well, I don't think the Bengals are good chalk, but I think Adams and Barkley are. At their projected ownership, I had Adams and Barkley being optimal right around their ownership. So that just speaks to how good of a play they were. Whereas the Bengals, I think I had being optimal at like half their ownership or something. So I'm just going to get away from them really easily. So basically, if instead of having Barkley, let's say I had Barkley with, I don't know, 25-30% chance of being optimal, and that was his ownership projection. If you change that ownership projection to 45%, he's still going to get into a good amount of my lineups just because he's so likely to be optimal, but it's going to be less than I played, because it's going to be basically, if you have him being optimal, the same percentage as the field has him, then he's like an actively good play, and he's somebody that is like Barkley lineups with Barkley are like getting pushed up for me to play them. If you tell me he's 30% optimal but 45% owned, he's going to be a guy that I'm using in my like Tampa stacks where Tampa's unowned. Then I'm still going to be throwing Barkley in there because the ownership doesn't matter. But there's going to be less lineups that I end up playing with him because the ownership, he's going to be coming across as a negatively leveraged play. So I would have had less. I still would have played him for sure, but I definitely would have had less. As far as Fournette goes, yeah, that workload is great. I was pretty pissed off yesterday when I went back and saw, because I knew he hadn't done well fantasy wise, but when I went back and saw that he had 24 carries and 4 targets and just did nothing. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, I still think Fournette going forward looks very good. I wouldn't take anything away from this week. Like, don't go in the next week saying, oh yeah, Leonard Fournette, he's old, he's bad, whatever. The guy just happened to have a bad week on 28 touches.
He's not splitting carries with anybody. Everybody else on this board, whether it's Gibson, you have, a pretty limited number of carries that 14 and 14 isn't bad, but you have McKissick coming in for some of that passing work. Like, Rachaad White is so distant when it comes to games that are going to be competitive for Tampa Bay this season. It just feels like it's going to be all Leonard Fournette for me going forward. Javonte Williams, it was nice to see 15 carries coming off of a game in Seattle where he only had 7. I will say Russell Wilson looks like dust, but that's a different conversation for a different day, different show for sure. Looking at some of the other ownerships in this mid-range, I mean, we had Mark Andrews, obviously he was a big part of the slate, ended up being a guy that we had Osimo, DeColts, Rinpack, and then, I think you shorted him the way that I shorted him, which is sad because I had all the Lamar Jackson. Just thought it would be better to have Bateman, and I was feeling really good after the first half, not so good after the second half.
Yeah, it's a pretty...
Oh, go ahead.
So he's just... oh, never mind. I was looking at the wrong... Never mind.
That's all right. Yeah, we're going to continue. Albert Aquibunum. There we go. I had to get it out. Aquibunum, and then Paris Campbell. 11.8%, 12.6%. Point per dollar, 0, because they had 0 fantasy points. Those aren't very good feelings. Good for you. You shorted him. I had a lot of Albert O. I thought he was a decent enough play. And Paris Campbell, thanks for coming. Have a nice day. Please never, ever, ever be chalk again. This was horrible. How'd you feel about those 2 zeros to finish out the ownership?
It's so like they were good plays, I think, in that they were cheap and they opened stuff up in your lineup and they had opportunities. It just goes back again to reevaluate to making sure you're evaluating. It's not just like chalk and not chalk. Like, and you see this every week. I used Dortch as the example on the show yesterday, and obviously he came through and smashed. But you see it like every week in NFL because you need value to open up those plays at the top. And you're going to get ownership going to guys like Campbell and Albert O that have opportunity, but that also have essentially no floor. And those guys are just... and they're priced differently too. But it's why it all comes back to trying to quantify it. And it's why the boom bust tool, I think, is so useful, or any version of that you can use, because it helps to quantify that. And so with players like that, they're important from a value standpoint to open stuff up in your lineup. But typically you can actually find pivots in that price range that give you similar ranges of outcomes, because I think a lot of times the field tends to overestimate the floor on the highest projected guys like Albert O and Campbell, and they think that there's like a much bigger gap between them and some of these other lower owned plays. Richie James was one that I used a lot yesterday, but that's one spot that I think is always really interesting in NFL tournaments, because there are exceptions, but a lot of times it just there's for every $3,500 guy that's getting a bunch of ownership, there's a couple more $3,500 guys that realistically are going to get like 1 or 2 less targets, and they all can give you a 0 and they all can house a long touchdown, and one of them is a fraction of the ownership.
Dude, you're just spitting fire today. I think that this is probably the most important show that you can watch on the network, and I think it's just because you really do a good job of explaining very clearly what we're looking at in tournaments compared to what the group think idea is for certain players. And yeah, the process that you go through, this is why you're successful at this. You haven't won $1 million, so you might suck, but it is what it is. Everybody hit that like button. We got to get over 100 likes for this thing, because we are, Adam's just crushing the game here today. Going through a recap of a slate that didn't go as best. My favorite slates that we did last year were obviously the ones that he won 100K, 200K. I think we're going to be having those slates coming up very, very soon. He's a very successful NFL DFS player. I know this because I've gone through his lineups for years, and it's continually been awesome. Just like BetMGM right now. If you want to be winning money instantly, bet $10, win $200 at BetMGM right now. In the video description box below, there's a link to sign up. And if you play NFL today, if you want to bet some NFL, put $10 on any money line as your first bet. Yes, on the money line of an NFL team for your first bet. So I would prefer the Vikings, in honor of my birthday. They would never let me down. They've never done that before in my entire life. So you bet $10 on the Vikings, you will get $200 of free bets over at BetMGM. That's 8 $25 bets spread out for you to be able to bet and make even more money over there. You want to be signed up at multiple sportsbooks. You want to be signed up in multiple spots. So sign up, bet $10, win $200 at BetMGM. So check that out for sure. Okay. Let's go through individual allocations here before we go to that winning lineup, and then we'll talk about his winning lineup. And then I always like to do this. It's one of my favorite things before the Omni individual who won. We're going to go to his worst lineup here at the very end, but Awesemo himself, 78% Devontae Adams. Have a stand, sir. Have a stand. Derek Carr, 36%, who was the quote-unquote cash game quarterback. How do you feel about playing a guy like Derek Carr? He ended up 18% in this tournament, which is a little bit higher than what he was in the Millie, I believe. But people always get away from playing the chalk game quarterback. Oh, you can't do that, Adam. How dare you do that? Well, the best player in the world just did that. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I thought it was fine. When I did the morning show with Josh yesterday, I was getting a lot of Devontae Adams and not getting a lot of Derek Carr, which I thought was like an interesting way to go because especially in full PPR, like Adams can smash and Carr can be pedestrian. But then I ended up playing a lot of Carr. So did Alex. I think it was fine. Like there were just enough spots that you could get low owned players yesterday. It kind of just goes back to your entire lineups. Like not that you probably even could from a salary standpoint, but you're probably not playing like the Bengals defense with Carr, Adams, Barkley, McCaffrey, like all in the same lineup. You're going to be holding hands a lot, but you can find plenty of ways to be different. Using those mid-range receivers that have a lot of upside is one way to do it. Getting away from the Bengals defense is another way to do it. So like, and that kind of from like an overarching standpoint, that's another reason why I just am going to end up not playing those popular defenses that much. Do I really want to use my ownership like to go to the Bengals, or do I want to use it for Devontae Adams and Derek Carr? It's typically I'm just gladly going to get off of that defense ownership. But yeah, it's still, we talk about this in baseball a lot. One player's ownership one player's ownership just isn't what you should be focusing on. You can build really good lineups that still have Derek Carr. And he also was likely to be the optimal quarterback when you factor in the price range and everything else. So I think he was a little bit overowned, but it wasn't by any crazy margin.
Yeah. Alex is why we have 25,000 people. We had 25,000 people tune in over the course of our 4 hours yesterday for Live Before Lock. Pretty insane fact coming off of 17, 18,000 that we had in week one. Just smashed that out of the park in week two. We have Lofty over on the Odd Shopper channel, just smashing numbers. That's because of the best information, and we teach you different ways to go about it. Because obviously you look at the tournament allocation for you, for Alex, for DeColts, for Rinpack, everybody's got a different number attached to them. But love all the points on Carr. We're kind of looking at the same thing. He was a little bit under on Saquon, but still had a third of it. A lot of 33.3% looking like for him. I don't know. Did he do like a certain cap on certain players? I can't tell. Is that something that would just randomly show up where he ends up in the same ballpark? Maybe it just did. 50 out of 150. What?
My guess is it's random because one, I sort of know what he does, and two, I have stuff that looks like that a lot of the time too.
Yeah. My little brother showing up in chat, giving me some love. I've never seen him in chat before. Comes in for my birthday. Happy birthday to me. Thank you, little man. Appreciate you. He's crushing the game back in South Dakota. So shout out him. Miss you. But we move down the rest of the board here to DeColts. Saquon Barkley, Devontae Adams seems like a repeating kind of situation. That Bengals defense thing still interesting, but Christian McCaffrey, great play. Ashton Doolin is where he planted his flag for sure. I mean, it's a lot better than playing Paris Campbell. I can tell you that much. I have no words. Leonard Fournette, love that play. Love that you were there too. Rinpack. Normally, we've had a lot of fun breaking down Rinpack's lineups in the past because you'll see 78% Patrick Mahomes, 94% Travis Kelce, just crazy stuff. His crazy stand-up yesterday was Antonio Gibson. We haven't talked about him at all. Obviously, 12 fantasy points, second highest total on the board. Kind of a bet against it, but he played a lot of Curtis Samuel. He played Carson Wentz. How do you feel about Antonio Gibson at the top of his allocations?
I think it's interesting. What did he do? So this is one where I would be interested. So he was heavy on that game. He had 23% St. Brown. He had 21% Carson Wentz. I would assume that's driving up some of the Antonio Gibson. I don't know where he was on the rest of the guys, but seems like he was pretty heavy on that game. So that's probably pushing Gibson up in addition to Gibson just being a solid play. You still don't have Brian Robinson. You have a game where you're expecting Washington to score a good amount of points. McKissick's the third down back. So you had Gibson coming off of a week one where he was very heavily involved. He's an explosive player. They'll try and get him the ball in space. So I thought Gibson was a good enough play individually. He's another one where, like, for me personally, I didn't get there just because I really wasn't getting to that game because of the total ownership that was coming in. But I do think if you were heavy on that game, then being heavy on Gibson made a lot of sense.
And to finish it out, one ship my money. Look at this. Richie James. Richie James. That's the name. Don't wear it out. I like him because he ended up being the lowest down out of all these Dortch-like individuals.
Yeah, he was like 4 in the millie.
Of course, Dortch ends up being the guy. Like, that was never in doubt. I wanted to throw up. that touchdown catch.
I was really glad when I saw his line. I was really glad that my lineups had been dead at halftime of the 1:00 games because it just would have pissed me off so much.
It could have been like me where I was like meandering around. Oh, I'm almost break even. I went to a lot of Cooper Kupp instead of Adams, and then that happened, and it was so bad, Adam, because when you're avoiding ownership again. If people don't understand this, late swap, it's a big part of my NFL process. Do you kind of focus on late swap on slates that might be going better than the one yesterday? You don't at all.
No, I pay very little attention. Because for me, like I pay more attention to late swapping in cash, or if I'm playing like small field tournaments, but typically I don't. For me, like large field tournaments, if I have a really good lineup, I'll late swap. Like if I have a good lineup and it's already contrarian, and I have some random like shitty one-off, I'll late swap to a better one. But outside of when I think I have a good lineup going into the 4:00 games, I personally don't really, because I just don't really think it's worth my time. Like I don't have like an easy late swap process or like a particularly good late swap process. And so when you're talking large field, top heavy tournaments, if my lineups are dead, it's not worth the like $1 or whatever to me to get back on my computer and redo everything.
See, you're not a fighter.
Yeah.
You know how I know you don't play competitive sports, or you know that you're not a crazy competitive person like me, is that you're just like, whatever.
No, I'm a wildly competitive person. I just don't think that late swap matters. I mean, late swap does matter. In large field tournaments, when I'm already dead, I don't think it affects my bottom line enough for me to care.
It affects mine, and I fight for every cent and dollar. Like,
so this is a poor person thing, not a competitive person thing.
Wow. It's all right. It's fine. I'm up 6 figures on the year. You think I care?
Yeah.
You don't have to do much to. You're so mean. Jesus Christ. Yeah, there it is. I was waiting for it, everybody. Wow. That's going to get clipped and put in circulation for the rest of time. Prize Picks. You guys want to check out Prize Picks? That is the place. They are the sponsor here of this lovely show where happy birthday to me. I want to swear at you, but this is an ad read, and obviously I love Prize Picks. I do a lot of content for them. I'm going to be doing a Monday night showdown. I do for every primetime game, I'm doing my Prize Picks. For every Sunday main slate, doing Prize Picks. You want to check out Prize Picks and do it. Signing up using promo code Stokastic right now. Actually, no, it's still promo code Awesemo. I apologize. Still promo code Awesemo gets you $100 first match deposit bonus as it goes right now. Basically, you're picking player props, more or less than certain numbers. And obviously there's going to be a phenomenal opportunity tonight to make some money in those streets. So 4 teams going, 2 separate games. Not many Monday nights you're going to get an opportunity to have this much action going at Prize Picks and DFS, wherever you want to be playing. But I absolutely cannot recommend Prize Picks enough. I've loved it for MLB all season long. I love it for the NFL as well. So check out prizepicks.com this second. $100 first match deposit bonus. You can up to 10x your money on any given lineup. So you put $5 in, you can win $50. There's also payouts if you only get 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5. Lots of opportunities to be making some money and enjoy yourself over at Prize Picks. So check that out with me tonight. All right. Well, I'm upset, but we're going to...
I mean, give me a couple more weeks of NFL and I will be late swapping.
First place, Omni Seon cashed one of his 3 lineups.
I had one point I actually wanted to make, and I totally forgot what it was now.
Yeah, it's because you're a bad person. Omni Seon, quarterback stack type. Quarterback, 2 wide receiver, and opposing. I would say that that's become one of the more normal stack types. That'll be something that we talk about going forward on this show. The importance of a bring back. If you don't know what a bring back is, it's playing somebody on the opposite side of the game. So we have Tua stacked up with Waddle, stacked up with Hill, running it back with Mark Andrews. So that ended up working out very, very nicely. That ends up being something very popular. You get the skinny stacks, which he had for his other 2 lineups. And I'd say that because of the high ceilings that you get from wide receivers, has become something else that has become increasingly popular, where you play Derek Carr, you play Devontae Adams on the other side, and then you just hope to hit the absolute nuts with everybody else, but you run it back with Dortch. Looks like I think Dortch was the main run back in that one. Sure was. And then the other one, quarterback, Jared Goff, wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had that in all 3 of his lineups. And then he ran that one back with Curtis Samuel. What a sharp individual he is there. But what do you think about this winning lineup looking at it?
I thought it was, good enough. There's plenty of times that people win tournaments, and it's just like I would have never gotten there.
How about 9 out of his running back position?
So I mean, running back, I was kind of looking at some of my good. I was looking at some of my good teams, more so on FanDuel because I actually had the Ravens there. But I was looking at some of them like going into the 4 o'clock games, and I was like, you might be able to win without really getting anything at running back, just because people wasted so much money on Barkley, McCaffrey, Fournette. So I do think that, obviously you're not ever going into a slate hoping to get what you got from Burkhead and Stevenson, but them being cheap and what it opened up for you still did make things work, given that basically all of the chalk running backs sucked. And I thought they were fine plays individually, like, not obviously not my favorite options. There's a reason they were 1%, but Stevenson gives you a ceiling at 5,200. Burkhead's coming off of a game where, like, he's the perfect example of somebody where you have no idea what his role is going to look like in week 2, but at low ownership, that's pretty appealing because there's like the range of outcomes just for his role, not even talking about his results, just the role is he could just be wildly underpriced. If he had the same role he had week 1, and you were just talking about like a $4,900 running back getting like 8 targets or whatever he got, and being the primary running back for Houston, then he's wildly underpriced. The reason that he wasn't popular is because he also could have just been the backup to Dameon Pierce, and that wouldn't have been shocking either. So I thought in tournaments at that ownership, he was interesting. I think this is the kind of lineup too, where you don't have to have a really low owned guy like that, but it doesn't hurt. Like the Tua being really low owned was nice. Waddle's really low owned, but like Hill's popular, Andrews is popular, St. Brown's popular, Samuel's popular. So I don't mind, shaving some ownership there, getting to Burkhead, getting to Stevenson. At least there were guys that were cheap and had a path to a good game that you didn't have to get like too wild with your imagination to see.
All right. So we got Mike. I was going to have him just pull up that one more time here, Mike. Go back to that main page. If you see the little hourglass on the far left side of the screen in the overview page, click on Omni Seon. On the far left, it'll say open all of Omni Seon's lineups. We're going to pull up all 3 of those here. To finish out the show, we have his top lineup. That was the one that I had talked through. And then let's see. Is it live there? Yeah. So go to the far left side of the screen there, Mike. See where it says Omni Seon. It has an hourglass next to his name in the all entrance tab. Click on that hourglass. And then it should open up all 3 of his lineups there. Yeah, it's okay. If it's not working, that's fine. But anyway, I was just going to talk through it. I will just explain his final lineup. Jared Goff, Chase Edmonds, Rex Burkhead. He played Rex Burkhead in 2 of his 3 lineups. Ramondre Stevens just completely punted on running back. Curtis Samuel, Jamar Chase. I would say that Bengals, they've got some things to work through. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Akwi Bunam, good thing he didn't play him in that main lineup. Devontae Adams, and the Patriots defense, which was serviceable, but certainly not the Buccaneers with their 26. Can't really say anything negative about the lineup other than maybe double stacking Jared Goff, maybe a better way to go. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't even think you had to do that. I mean, your options there are what, Hawkinson or Chark, basically. I'm assuming you weren't going to go to
Josh Reynolds, baby.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'm fine with the single stack there. Like Hawkinson was more expensive than Alberto, so that would have cost him something somewhere. Samuel worked as the run back. You're certainly not going to just willingly turn Jamar Chase into DJ Chark. So I'm fine with the single stack.
All righty. Well, that is going to do it here for us. Any other like overarching themes? We covered pretty much everything. You covered pretty much everything for the people. Anything you want them to know going into week 3?
I think just to keep in mind when you're making tournament lineups that it's all about like balancing out chances of success with ownership. It's not just simply, despite what a lot of people will say or make you believe, like it's not just saying like, oh, well, I'm not going to play the popular players, especially with like how good most DFS players are and how good projection systems are. The best plays in terms of like expectation are typically the ones that are really popular. Like you'll see people be like, oh, the chalk, like people were playing like bad chalk or whatever. Unless you have like an actual way to explain why it was bad, like range of outcomes
Bengals
regarding defenses, chances are they were chalky because they were good. And what you're actually saying is that they were overowned. So being able to figure out like which ones are overowned and which ones aren't is really important. And I've mentioned a couple times, but that's where like the boom bust tool on the site comes in. But really, just when you're building your lineups, keep in mind that you don't want to just be going in with a blind approach, like, oh, I'm not going to play popular plays, or I am going to play popular plays, or whatever. Like, evaluate them individually, and you'll just immediately start making better lineups.
Well, let's get those 7 likes as we get out of here. I see 350 people still hanging out in the chat. If you could hit that like button as we finish out, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you to Mike Lawrence. First time running Fantasy Cruncher. I'd say pretty successful. I'd say pretty darn successful. So great work by him. He's going to be hanging out here for the next couple shows. We've got coming up later the NFL strat. Oh, no, that's us. No House Advantage Monday night. Oh, look at that. That'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Aton and Jeff taking you guys through half an hour over there. We've got MLB Live Before Lock. Oh, look at that. That's you and me coming back at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Nothing I'd rather do than
two
shows
when?
with a 4 p.m. Eastern time.
Oh, glad you said that.
Oh my God. You're so irresponsible. I can't even. It's whatever.
Wait, it's a Live Before Lock? What time?
So it's at 4, but it's because we have all the great Monday night deeper dive Live Before Lock coverage coming up for you guys. That'll be Dave Lochran, Neil Orfield, taking you guys at 5:15 p.m. Eastern time. And then NFL Monday Night Live Before Lock. Yeah, 2 football games, 2 for the price of 1. Matt Savoca and Matt Gajewski breaking everything down for that Monday night. Looking forward to both games. Tennessee Buffalo should be fun, but hey, Skull baby. Me versus the Birds. I'm an actual Vikings fan as opposed to, that fake Eagles fan on the other side of the glass. Mike Lawrence, absolute poser, works for the FBI. Shut up. You're done talking. Nope. Done. Stop talking. I'm so upset with you. Cool. That does it for us, guys. Let's get on out of here. Hit that like button, subscribe button. Thank you so much to Adam for doing a great job. Thank you again to Mike. I'm Eric Lindquist. See you guys a little bit later in the day.